Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.
We have a lot of international viewers who've discovered this show. We have multiple versions of gods in Sanatana, Hinduism as the world knows it. Shri Ram is one of the most popular deities in our culture.
There are many versions of the Ramayana as well, but the original one was written by the great sage Valmiki, who lived at the same time as Shri Ram lived.
There's very few people who have deep dived into the original Valmiki Ramayana. Yashodeep sir is one of them.
The story of a line that Lakshman drew on the ground called Lakshman Rekha. There is the story of a bridge built using floating rocks. This is not mentioned at all in the Valmiki Ramayana.
I'd love to know what is spoken about the appearance of Shri Ram and Ma Sita. Are they described in terms of how they look?
Much later in the story, Sita asks Shri Hanuman to describe Ram. So he says, "Can you describe him for me?" And then he gives. So Dasharatha told Ram that you will be crowned Yuvraj the next day itself. Vasishta saw that Ayodhya had started preparations for the coronation the next day. The air was thick with excitement. And then Kaikeyi told Ram about her demands, that Bharat should be made Yuvraj and he has to go into exile.
What do you actually think Shri Ram felt in this moment?
Ram says this is all the result of karma, that life has taken a turn like this for him. Lakshman says, cowards hide behind karma. But Ram, you are most capable and brave. Why are you becoming philosophical like this? Kausalya agrees that Ram must go. Her heart is broken, but she blesses him. And with that, Ram, Lakshman and Sita's chariot pulled out of the city of Ayodhya. Iti her asa. That is how it happened.
This is our Diwali special of TRS that I hope people end up watching with their families. I also hope that this episode reaches everyone who has wanted to learn the basics about the Ramayana. Our culture, Bharatiya culture, Indian culture, Sanatani culture is primarily influenced by two epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. But a lot of folks don't know where to begin studying about the Mahabharata or the Ramayana. In today's episode, one of our all-stars returns. It's Yashodeep Deodhar sir, whose channel 21 Notes is making waves on the global internet for its narration of the original Valmiki Ramayan. So this entire podcast was the podcast version of storytelling. It's going to be relevant for the next 500 years, honestly. That's the power of the conversation we had on that day. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. It's the perfect Diwali special. It's the ultimate Ramayan retelling. I also want to mention that we've covered only a fourth of the story. 3/4 is left. Yashodeep sir will be returning next month for part 2. But for now, this is the beginning of the Ramayan explained by Yashodeep Deodhar, one of the few souls in our country who has studied the Ramayana enough to narrate it in English for a global audience. This is YD on TRS. Yashodeep Deodhar sir, welcome to the brand new season of the Ranveer Show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me and congratulations on your new studio.
Thank you, sir.
It's superb, yes.
Thank you so much. This is our inaugural episode in this space. I consider this a new season of TRS because we released our first international episode with Naval Ravikant. We have a lot of international viewers who've discovered this show. There is a Chinese epic called Journey to the West, which has been turned into a video game, which has become a global phenomenon. The phenomenon is the video game called Black Myth Wukong. And that's the story that everyone in China knows about since the time they're little. So for international listeners, I want to tell you guys that our equivalent of that story in Indian culture, there's a couple of them. There's the Mahabharata and there's the story that preceded the Mahabharata. They're not linked. But the story that preceded the Mahabharata is the Ramayana. Of course, we have multiple versions of gods in Sanatana, aka Hinduism as the world knows it. And Shri Ram is one of the most popular deities in our culture today. But Shri Ram as a deity is based on the character of an ancient king called Lord Ram, uh, who supposedly lived in our land in a phase that people believe to be roughly around 12,000 BC. That's according to Nilesh Oak Sir's work. But today we're just going to go over the story of the Ramayana. Over to you. I had to just set some context.
Thank you. Thank you. So, the Ramayana is the Adi Kavya, the oldest epic. And like you correctly said, there are two fundamental core texts of this land, Ramayana and Mahabharata. And Ramayana is the first one. There are many versions of the Ramayana as well, but the original one was written by Maharshi Valmiki, the great sage Valmiki, who lived at the same time as Shri Ram lived. So they were contemporaries, and Maharshi Valmiki wrote the biography of Shri Ram at that time. Now, even for audiences who are familiar with the Ramayana, they are usually not familiar with the Valmiki Ramayana. It has so happened that the original story is less known than the later versions.
And the later versions are kind of based on the television show Ramayan.
The television shows or the movies or the comics, all popular versions have, for example, certain elements. There is the story of a line that Lakshman drew on the ground called Lakshman Rekha. There is the story of a bridge built using floating rocks. This is not mentioned at all in the Valmiki Ramayana, in the original. So it is very different. Even for audiences who are familiar with the story, the Valmiki Ramayana, the original, is very different.
What I want to tell all audiences, global and Indian, is that there's very few people who have deep dived into the original Valmiki Ramayan. Yashodeep Sir is one of them. They also say that this is the only Ramayan that you should absorb into your heart as being the original. So again,
let me clarify there. There is a place for other versions too, no doubt about that. Their purpose may be devotional texts or literary texts. But if your question is what really happened, then the reference text is the Valmiki Ramayana. Because we call the Valmiki Ramayana Itihas. Itihas means iti ha asa. That is how it happened. Loosely it translates into history for, in modern terms, but loosely only I say. But like I said, if the question is what happened, then we have to refer to the Valmiki Ramayana.
okay, I think this is a very important episode for the Indian internet as well. You run a YouTube channel yourself where you've covered the whole story, but kind of in a solo podcast form.
Yes.
So
100 episode series on the Valmiki Ramayana, 21 notes Valmiki Ramayana video series.
today we're doing a bit of what we call a samvad, which is a discussion on the original story.
Yes.
So because there's a lot of emotion that Indians attach with this story, it's affected all of our personalities
Yes.
while we're growing up, especially if you are a Hindu, a Sanatani. This story is in your heart and it has molded your subconscious mind.
At the same time, I also want to add right at the beginning that even people who are familiar, they have a lot of questions and confusion about the Valmiki Ramayana, about the Ramayana, for example. We covered some of this in the last discussion that we had. Many people ask, why did Shri Ram ask Sita to do the Agni Pariksha? Or why did he kill Vali while hiding behind a tree? For those who are not familiar, we'll get to these incidents. But there are questions that people have in their mind. How could Ravan have 10 heads and so on? And the Valmiki Ramayana answers all these questions. Like we saw last time, the Agni Pravesh or Agni Pariksha incident was very different in the Valmiki Ramayana than how we normally see it. So, to get all the clarifications and answers, this is the text we need to go into. And I'm glad that we are doing this as a full discussion from start to finish. Many times we talk about specific incidents of the Ramayana, but we can't really understand the full story and get the benefit of it without understanding it fully from start to finish.
Right. They say that whenever you begin retelling the story of the Ramayana, Hanumanji, one of the key deities in the story, makes his presence felt in the room. So
Yes.
we have a little sculpture of Hanumanji right next to you. I sincerely pray to him that he joins us for this podcast. And I will call out to him by just saying Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.
Let me begin by asking you why Sage Valmiki wrote the Ramayana in the first place.
It's an interesting question. And actually, it leads me to, the very beginning. In fact, I wanted to give you a flavor for what this text is, show you some actual verses. By the way, this is one half of the book. So there are two parts to it, 24,000 verses. You asked why did he write it? It's actually a very interesting way in which he begins. And he begins with a question. So let me show you the first few verses of the Valmiki Ramayana. So Srimad Valmiki Ramayanam, Balakandam, which is the first book of the Ramayana. Prathamaha Sargah, the first chapter. So in the first verse, Maharshi Valmiki asks Narad Muni, the great sage and scholar, the following question. Okay. Now I will go into the second verse. I will read it out and then break it up for you. Okay.
Crazy to me that this is written in poetry form.
Yes. 24,000 verses. And poetry, these are 32 syllables. Every shlok, every verse has 32 syllables exactly. Some have another meter too. And there is also a particular pattern of long and short length of those syllables. So it's amazing that somebody can write, 24,000 of these.
I mean, how many years have you been studying this, sir?
6 years.
Okay. And over the course of these 6 years, do you feel that it almost intoxicates you while you're reading it?
Well, it has a lot of... we will see what the effect is.
Okay.
All right. So the second verse. Kon vasmin sampratam loke gunavan kascha viryavan dharmadnyascha kritadnyascha satyavakyo dridavratah. The first part. Kon vasmin sampratam loke. Who in the world lives today? That is the question. Who in the world lives today who has all the following great qualities? All right. Viryavan. He's brave. Veer, like Ranveer. Dharmadnya. He knows what is the right thing to do. Kritadnya. He is grateful. He always speaks the truth. Satyavakyo. And Dridavratha. He remains firm and steadfast in his resolve. So Maharshi Valmiki is asking, who in the world lives today who has all these qualities? And then he goes next into the third and fourth verses as well. Charitrena chako yuktaha. Who has the strength of character? And then, very important, sarva bhuteshu ko hitaha. Who is concerned about the welfare of all beings? He's not concerned about his own welfare only, about his near and dear ones, about his country or his people or those who follow certain philosophy. The ask is, who is concerned about the welfare of all beings, not even all people, all beings? That is the ask, right? And he's not finished yet. He's also a scholar, a doer, samartha, and kashchaika priyadarshanaha. He is pleasant to look at. His presence is joyful. Further, he has attained control over his senses. He's radiant and he does not have envy. Anasuyakaha. And then, very important, jita krodha. He has attained control over his anger, but he won't remain silent in the face of wrongdoing. When required, he will step into battle, and then his rage is such that even the devas, the whole world, will tremble with fear. Okay? So this is the ask. Who in the world lives today? Etadichhamyaham shrotum param kautuhalam hime maharshe tvam samarthosi jnatum evam vidham naram. I wish to know, hear about such a person. I'm very curious. Oh Maharshi, only you are capable of telling me about such a person, Naram, right? So this is what Maharshi Valmiki asks. Narad Muni replies and he says, what you're asking for, it's extremely rare to find in one person. But I know of just the man. His name is Ram. And then Narad Muni describes the brief story of Ram and his characteristics in this first chapter, Prathamaha Sargaha. And in the rest of the text, 24,000 verses. Maharishi Valmiki gives the details of this story. Now your question was, why did he write it? The answer is right there. If you look at the kind of person he is looking for, these are universal human values. Who can argue that being brave, generous, thoughtful, caring, truthful, a doer is not good? No one can argue. And he's concerned about the welfare of the whole world. Sarva bhuteshu ko hita. Maharishi Valmiki wanted to set the highest example of what it means to be a good human being. Somebody who exemplifies universal human values. That is the purpose. And why did he write it? We spoke about this last time. When you have a role model, whether it's a role model for sports or business, your parents are role models for their children, teachers are role models. We look at a role model and we try and become more like that. So, Maharishi Valmiki wanted to give this role model so that we can be the best that is possible.
To understand the Ramayana better, I'd also like to bring up a shlok mentioned in the Mahabharata, which is a very good representation of why we believe that Lord Ram was born on this planet Earth. And it is related to Vishnu. So the shlok goes, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuttanam adharmasya tadatmanam shrijamyaham. The meaning, whenever there's a decline in righteousness and an increase in sinfulness, O human, at that time I manifest myself on earth. And you hear this when you're growing up in our country. You hear this shlok a lot. When I heard it as a child, there was some aspect of that shlok that sank into my mind. What I have understood about this shlok is, one, in the history of our land, and therefore the history of earth as well in many ways, the divine descends upon earth and takes the form of something called an avatar, which is an extension of himself as the divine. So in this case, Vishnu takes the form of an avatar in the form of Shri Ram in order to cleanse the world of the evil that existed in the world. And that's
at that time, yes.
Yeah. The main adversary of Shri Ram is Ravan, who is understood to be the demon king. And I'm sorry, I'm already talking about Ravan at this point.
And okay, you brought this up, but it's an important point. Let's not frame the Ramayana as a Ram versus Ravan.
Okay.
In fact, we will see today that the first book, the Balakand, and the second book, Ayodhya Kand, Ravan plays no role at all.
Wow.
And Ram faces some extraordinary challenges of life. So this is about, like I said before, a great person overcoming the challenges of life. Whether it is Ravan or we will see Manthara or Kaikeyi, they are only creating the situations in which the reactions are to be seen. So, while we do look at translations, using words like demon king, etc., I think is not appropriate. Let's understand how Maharishi Valmiki has described these characters.
Before we move forward, I just want to say one last thing. I was talking about this shlok to a monk that I met through the show. And that monk mentioned something very interesting to me. He said that the shlok talks about the descent of God onto the earth in order to rid the earth of evil. But you can also understand it as evil and wrongdoings taking over your own mind. And once you reach a point of saturation with that evil or hopelessness, you call out to God and say, God, come help me. Which is the basis of why every human prays in the first place. They say that you only pray when you really feel hopelessness as an emotion. So I look at the earth praying to God and saying, hey, please descend upon me and cleanse me of this evil as kind of the basis of this entire story. There's another basis that I really love to focus on when we're talking about the Ramayana, which is that as a young human growing up in our land, you really absorb aspects of Shri Ram into your own mind. And if you really deep dive into the Ramayana, it helps you navigate through many, many situations in life.
Absolutely. And that is the purpose of reading the Ramayana. It should help you navigate the challenges of life. It should help you have better relationships when you look at the exemplary behavior set up in that. So absolutely, the purpose is to benefit here and now.
Okay, now we will continue with the story.
Okay, so shall we get into the story then?
Yes, sir.
The story begins in Ayodhya, the greatest and the grandest city of the world at that time. Prithivyam tam anuttamam. So Ayodhya is situated on the banks of Sarayu River in what is now northern India. At that time, it was on the southern banks of the river, and Maharshi Valmiki gives a detailed description of this city. It was a beautiful city, well laid out streets. A royal Rajmarg went right through the city. It was sprinkled with water daily. It was covered with flowers. The mansions were beautifully constructed in a well-organized manner. And these were large, multi-storied mansions studded with diamonds and gems. It was a very prosperous city. There were areas for different markets. And he also uses some interesting adjectives for Ayodhya. He says, for example, that the water was so clean that it was like drinking sugarcane juice. Ikshukandara clean city. Also, another interesting adjective is Grihair Vichitrair Upashobhitam, that there were some buildings of interesting design or eclectic architecture. Even today, the greatest cities of the world push the envelope on design and architecture, right? Ayodhya was the great city of that time. It was ruled by King Dasharatha, who was in the Ikshwaku dynasty. Dasharatha was a visionary, powerful king, and also loved by his people. Interestingly, Valmiki also mentions that he was a scholar, a Rajarshihi, so a scholar king. And he was supported by his advisors and ministers and government officials, advisors like Guru Vasishtha. The government officials of that time, Valmiki describes them, they were also well-educated, capable, and fair. They yatha vachanakarinah, they would do as they said they promised. They provided service with a smile, smitapurva bhibhashina. And interestingly, if the time came, they would not hesitate from punishing even their own children. Praptakalam tute dandam dharayeyu suteshwapi. So such were the government officials. And about the people, Valmiki says they were happy, healthy, contented, truthful. They were also righteous. And many of these things, Valmiki says, sarve narashcha naryascha, men and women were like this. There were some theatre groups in the city that were comprised entirely of women. And Valmiki says about the citizens, there was no one who was not well educated. There was no one who was not wealthy. There was no one who was not wearing good clothes. Now, these are interesting descriptions because many times we think that in the past knowledge was perhaps restricted to only a certain section of the society. But here you see, the king was a scholar king, the government officials were educated, and so were all the citizens. Also, about wealth, we think that perhaps the kings, if they were wealthy, their wealth was based on exploitation. But here, the Ikshwakus ruled in a way that the economy flourished. There was wealth creation and also wealth distribution. And of course, the king was wealthy too. So, such was the Dasharatha's land. Everything was good for him, working out well for him. Everything except one thing. He did not have an heir. He did not have a child. Dasharatha had 3 wives, Kausalya the eldest, Sumitra and Kaikeyi. But he was childless. And so he discussed with his ministers and they all decided that they should do the Ashwamedh and the Putra Kameshti Yagyas in order to have children. Now, we spoke about this last time, loss of technology over time. So you may wonder, what is this Yagya and how does it help having children? And whether it is the Vimana technology that is lost over time, and we spoke about the mantra and the Yagya technology as well. So I'll tell you what is described But that technology is lost. We can't recreate it today. But essentially, they did some process which perhaps created a herbal, some remedy which aided conception. But I'll tell you how the yagya was done. They also said that the best person to do this was one called Rishyashringa Muni, a sage called Rishyashringa. There was a kingdom east of Ayodhya. So we are in northern India. East of Ayodhya, a kingdom called Angadesh. And the king's daughter was Shanta. And Shanta's husband was Rishyashringa Muni. By the way, in some retellings, Shanta is considered, it is told that she was Dasharatha's daughter, who was adopted by the king there, but not according to Valmiki Ramayana. So we are discussing Valmiki Ramayana. Dasharatha invited Shanta and Rishyashringa Muni to come and do the yagya. So the Muni came, and a horse was released together with some soldiers. And then the preparations for this yagya started. Now, a mini city was constructed on the northern banks of Sarayu. The city, Ayodhya, was on the southern banks. So think of this like a business expo or exhibition, or even what we would create for Kumbh Mela, right? Something to house hundreds and thousands of people, because these were the guests from all different lands who came here. And in terms of activities, there were two sets. The central part is, think of it as a laboratory, where you do certain process which actually helps with the conception. And in the other areas of the yagya, there were debates, discussions, music, dance, entertainment, and so on.
When you're growing up in our country, you understand yagya as an elaborate prayer ritual.
Yes, an elaborate process done over fire, right? That's the impression we have. And here too, the core area, Maharishi Valmiki says that there were specific ingredients which were added in a specific order and duration over the fire. And then he says a being arose from the fire and gave a bowl of payasam or porridge, kheer, to Dasharatha, and said that give these to your wives and they will bear children. Now, we said that this is itihas, that is how it happened. And you may be wondering, how can a being arise from the fire? So, the way itihas is described is, it is what happened in the past but told in story format. Purva Vrittam, as it happened, but Kathayuktam, told in story format, that is itihas. So, over the fire, in this laboratory, they were adding ingredients, and then over time, the process created this outcome. In a way, the fire created this outcome. Now, poetically, you can personify the fire and say, a being arose from the fire and gave this payasam. But essentially, that's the outcome of this process, that this payasam was created, and Dasharatha went and gave it to his wives.
Can I interject again a little bit? I just want to inform international listeners especially that there are also researchers who are your friends,
Yes.
Rupa Bhati and Nilesh Oak sir, who dedicate their entire life's work to actually trying to date the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, as well as the events in long-term Indian history. So normally in international history textbooks, you're taught that history begins from the Indus Valley civilization, the Egyptian civilization, the Chinese civilization, and the Mesopotamian civilization. And they date that to about maybe 5000 BC. But what Nilesh sir's work has revealed is that according to the Valmiki Ramayan, where there are astronomy-based inputs as well, it roughly dates to somewhere around the 12,000 BC mark. I can't remember the exact one. It's roughly in that zone, which is about 14,000 years ago. He also goes into details about the reality of what the map of India was at that time, what the map of the civilized world was at that time. All this comes up later in the story. So when we use the word itihas in modern day Hindi, it usually means history. Like we use it as a substitute for the word history. And every single Sanatani who is a practicing Sanatani believes that these epics actually happened. They also get offended by the usage of the term mythology, because that's the term that our European imperialists gave to the Ramayana and Mahabharata. So it's almost an offensive term if you use it in front of a Sanatani. Moving on with the story, this thing you said about the being, sir, the
Yes.
being from fire, we've had multiple Tantra podcasts which are based on the mystical aspects of Sanatan Dharma.
Yes.
There is a very deep mystical aspect. Again, the loose translation of Tantra would be technique. And again, the West, at one point in the West's history, would term Tantra, even Sanatan Dharma, as something called paganism, which again, most Sanatanis take as an offensive word. But there is a very deep mystical aspect of Sanatan Dharma as well. I've actually had tantrics come on the show and talk about doing elaborate havans which happen over hours, and they are able to see something like human shapes come out of the fire. But again, this is
Okay.
roughly
Yes,
podcast number 850, and I feel that many ancient, elaborate, advanced, ritualistic practices from the world of Sanatan Dharma have been lost in the modern day, in the same way that the technology called the Vimana technology or the aeroplane technology has been lost.
Right.
So there's a lot of aspects of even the Valmiki Ramayana that perhaps were possible considering the kind of knowledge that people had back in 12,000 BC. And one last thing I'd like to mention here is that often as modern day human beings, because of the way the West looks at the world of science, we assume that we're the most evolved and most advanced human beings that have ever walked on this planet. But no one accounts for what Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson talk about in their own research. They mainly talk about cataclysmic events. And they say that civilization has often been rebooted because of nature. A meteor hits the earth, a super volcano explodes, and the human population has to restart. It's reduced to a very few number of human beings who are usually refined to the interiors of deserts and jungles, who are able to protect themselves through that apocalyptic event. And that's where civilization restarts. So my belief after doing so many episodes related to these topics is that the people that we're hearing about in this story were, to put it in an easy way more advanced than us. And they knew way more, not just about mysticism, but also about technology. That's the context I would like to give. Now I'd love for you to carry.
So we'll come to certain and institutions called ashrams. So we'll come across them. These were the places of essentially creation and preservation of knowledge and technology. Many times we think of ashrams as, yes, about spiritual knowledge, but they also created weapon systems. So all sorts of knowledge creation and preservation was done in the ashrams.
Sorry to be interjecting.
Not at all, not at all. And in fact, you raised the point about, itihas and mythology. That is why I use many times terms, the original terms instead of their translations. So I said yagya, not sacrifice, right? So dharma, yagya, itihas, let's just use the original words that Valmiki has used. Even if people are not familiar with these terms right now, as we go along, they will become familiar.
How would you loosely translate the word dharma into English? Because it's a very key aspect of both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata.
Yes.
And honestly, even after so many podcasts and this much studying, I haven't understood what the exact meaning of dharma is.
The closest is righteousness, the right thing to do. So, if you take the shlokas, the verses of Ramayana, where the word dharma comes, and if you don't know the meaning, many times when we are also reading a book, we come across a word that we don't know. We understand it by context, right? So if you replace dharma by righteousness or the right thing to do, those verses would make sense.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Let's carry on.
Right. So the yagya was over. Dasharatha gave the payasam, the porridge, to his wives, and Rishashringa Muni went back. After 12 months, the yagya worked. So on the 9th day of the month of Chaitra, Ram Navami, Kausalya gave birth to Shri Ram.
Was she the eldest?
She was the eldest, yes. Okay. And the firstborn was Ram, Shri Ram, on Ram Navami. And soon afterwards, Kaikeyi gave birth to Bharat. So he was second. And then Lakshman and Shatrugna. So 4 sons were born to Dasharath.
To 3 wives.
Yes.
So Kaushalya Ma gave birth to Shri Ram.
Yes.
Um,
Kaikeyi gave birth to Bharat, and Sumitra gave birth to Lakshman and Shatrughna.
okay. And usually when you're growing up in India, you associate Lakshman with Shri Ram and Shatrughna with Bharat.
Yes, you've correctly pointed that out, because Maharishi Valmiki also says that when they were growing up, all 4 brothers, there was no issue between them. They were close, but Lakshman and Ram were so close, it was as though Ram's life force, prana, was outside, and that was Lakshman. And Bharat and Shatrughna were very close.
Got it.
But about their childhood, very little, we know very little about it. He has described it in only 12 verses, 12 shlokas out of 24,000. So that's less than a page, less than 0.05% of the entire book, of the first 16 years of Ram's life.
Got it. At the start of the story, we mentioned about Avatar,
Yes.
which is God descending down to earth in human form. Now, the thing with avatars is that in Sanatana Dharma, there's some avatars that are completely aware that they are God in human form. And as you're growing up in India, what they say about Shri Ram is that he was not completely aware that he was God in human form. People around him understood that he was a piece of divinity, but perhaps because of his own humility, he didn't look at himself as an ansh or a part of God. He just lived life as a righteous human.
Yes. And so he never proclaimed that he was born as Vishnu. Nor in the Valmiki Ramayana do we find extraordinary actions. Not extraordinary, but what we call Leela, right? That we normally associate with divine incarnations. But I would think the exemplary behavior is extraordinary and a reflection of the divine.
Got it. Okay.
So the 4 children, the 4 sons were born. And although we know very little, what Valmiki has described is that he calls it Sarve Veda Vida Shurah Sarve Lokahite Ratah. So they were sure, they were brave. Of course, they were trained in warfare, in archery, Dhanur Vidya. As princes, they would be expected to lead armies. But again, they were also taught the Vedas. They were steeped in the learning of the Vedas. Sarve Veda Vida Shurah.
You'll have to give us context on what the Vedas are.
Vedas is the ancient body of knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, the West knows about the Bhagavad Gita because it's spoken about on Western podcasts and in Western media. They say that there are 4 Vedas.
Yes.
And the essence of the Vedas is encapsulated into the Bhagavad Gita. But when you actually open up the Vedas, they're very elaborate in terms of the quantum of information. There's everything from music to mysticism, to the nature of reality, to even Ayurveda, to astrology, any kind of science that assists human beings.
The body of knowledge is Veda. Yeah. Again, as princes, it is not only warfare that they were taught, but also all of this knowledge. And the purpose of all this training, whether it's knowledge or archery, was Sarve Lokahite Ratah. Lokahit means welfare of the people. They were steeped, they were dedicated to the welfare of the people. We'll see this again and again. It is not ruling over people, but serving the people, looking after their welfare, right? So that is how the 4 children were brought up. This is a very brief description of their childhood. When Ram was a little short of 16 years old, a great sage called Vishwamitra came to Dasharatha's court one day. Dasharatha was delighted. He felt honored that the great sage had come to meet him, so he greeted him warmly. They exchanged pleasantries, and then Dasharatha asked him, what can I do for you? He also said, please don't hesitate. I will do whatever you ask of me. So Vishwamitra told him that he was doing a yajna. And there were 2 Rakshasas, Marich and Subahu.
What is Rakshasa?
What is Rakshasa? Now, let me know if this works. Instead of telling you what it is, we will see what they are doing. Because again, if I use the word demon or something else, I think I would be incorrectly classifying it. Let's go along and let's see if that it becomes clear based on what they're doing.
Sure.
Okay. Because we also have some stereotypes and misconceptions about Rakshasas, right? And instead of saying, no, that stereotype is wrong, let's actually hear how they are described. And it's great that we are reading this from, so we'll get snippets of what the Rakshasas are doing, etc. And we'll learn who they are.
I have to bring up the Japanese animated Ramayan, which is how my whole generation visualizes the Ramayan. And I think it was a fantastic retelling of the epic. I'm not 100% sure if they followed exactly what's written in the Valmiki Ramayana. I'm pretty sure they took their own creative liberties with it. But my entire generation of Indians has used that anime to understand and visualize the Ramayana. Therefore, Rakshasas in that anime are depicted as magical dark beings.
Yes, and if you ask a child to draw a Rakshas today, perhaps he will draw them as, some large, hideous-looking creature with horns or things like that. But, let's see how... so, something like that. They are creating disturbances. Vishwamitra says that two Rakshasas, Marich and Subahu, are creating disturbances in my yajna. And he says this is not a one-off incident. There are numerous incidents throughout society. And the kingpin behind this is one called Ravan. Vishwamitra tells Dasharatha that if he does not take care of this right now, things will get worse. And he must resolve it now if he wishes the world to remain rooted in Dharma. Once again, the word comes. If the world is to remain rooted in righteousness, you must sort this out right now. So he said, I want you to send your son Ram with me to fight and kill these two Rakshasas. Dasharatha was taken aback. He said, my son is not even 16 years old. He's still a boy. Unashodasha varsho me Ramo. Me Ramaha. Dasharatha went through a few emotions. First he said, I cannot send my son with you. Then he said, I will come myself with my army and sort this matter out for you. But in the end, Dasharatha said, I cannot help you in this regard. Vishwamitra was, extremely angry. But he was also disappointed with Dasharatha. He said, Yadidam te kshamam rajan gamishyami yathagatam. I am recalling some of these texts. You may be able to, because you know Hindi, you may be able to, understand them. Yadi idam te kshamam. If this is your capability, right? Kshamata. If this is all that you are capable of, then I will go back just the way I had come. He said to Dasharatha, be well. But he said, Mithya pratidnyah kakutstha sukhi bhava sabandhavaha. He reminded Dasharatha, so, oh great descendant of Kakutstha. So Kakutstha was another king in the Ikshvaku dynasty. He's reminding him, oh great descendant of Kakutstha. Oh great breaker of promises. May you be well. Sukhi bhava sabandhavaha. Surrounded by your friends and family. Vishwamitra knew that Dasharatha was secure, but only for now. If he didn't sort this out, then surely, his people were doomed. Dasharatha's Guru Vasishtha then stepped in. He told Dasharatha, he reminded him that he had made a promise to Vishwamitra, that he would do whatever was asked of him. And he could not break the promise. This was not the way of the Ikshvaku kings. And he also told Dasharatha that he said, I know Vishwamitra very well. He will not allow any harm to come to Ram. And also there are many astras and shastras, weapon systems, that only he knows about. And if you send Ram with him, he will teach them. So there is much that Ram can learn if you send him with him. And so Dasharatha finally agreed. And they sent not only Ram, but also Lakshman together with Vishwamitra. So, these boys are about class 10 students right now, sent off to fight two deadly Rakshasas. And the next few chapters of the Ramayana are about Shri Ram and Lakshman's journey with Vishwamitra. So they head off east out of Ayodhya towards Siddhashram, the ashram where this yajna is being done. Let me also give you a quick background for the political geography of that time. So Ayodhya was the capital of a janpad called Kosal. Janpad loosely translates to a kingdom. But I say loosely because the area of the janpad was about the size of a district. So you could ride across it on horseback in a day. Right? But that was not the only area that Dasharatha ruled over, because he also collected taxes from the other janpads, from the other kings. And so there were the different, agricultural lands had villages, and then in between the villages there was the urban center called the Nagar, and all of this agricultural land was one janpad. Okay. Between the janpads were the vanas. Vana is grassland or forest, which were not ruled by any king, because it's land that you don't need to keep organized. You don't collect taxes from there. So it was not under the vanas were not under the domain of any king. And the ashrams were inside the vanas of the rishis. So the rishis were also not under any king. So when they stepped out of Kosal, they are going through these vanas, the forests and the grasslands. They're sleeping on the grass. Vishwamitra is teaching them mantras along the way. And then one day, after about 2 days of walking, they come to a forest which looks very dangerous. It's ominous. There are broken branches and creepers lying around, screeching birds in the air, insects buzzing around. And Ram asks Vishwamitra, which forest is this? And Vishwamitra says, this is the forest of Tataka. Let me tell you about her. Now, Tataka is a Rakshasi. Okay, I said, let's learn as we go along, right? We understand who these Rakshasas are. So let's understand from the backstory of Tataka. Vishwamitra says that Tataka was born to a very wealthy person in a very good family. She was a gem of a daughter, Kanya Ratnam. So not at all the Rakshas that you would typically draw, like we just said, large, hideous looking with horns. She was a beautiful girl, grew up in a good family. But over time, she became full of Rakshasness, Rakshasatvam. She became cruel. And so she became a Rakshasi. Right? Now, some of the stereotypes which are broken by this story is whether it is, some people believe that the Rakshasas used to reside in Sri Lanka or South India. No. We are 2 days walking distance east of Ayodhya, right? So we are not in Sri Lanka. It's not a location. Rakshasas is not a locational issue. Also, it has nothing to do with race, because she was not born in a Rakshas family. She was born in a Yaksha family actually, and she became a Rakshasi, right? So it also has nothing to do with race, but it does have something to do with cruelty, Rakshasness.
For better understanding,
Yeah.
I think that most people, when they're listening to an epic like this, they attach modern day human understanding to the narrative of these epics. So again, when you're growing up, you're told that Lanka, which is like the kingdom of Ravan, is Sri Lanka. And then you meet people like Yashodeep Deodhar and Nilesh Oku, who say, I'm not so sure. Again, this will all come later on in the story. But my angle for interjecting here is that I think society in general was a mix and match of different kinds of human beings with a fair amount of higher/lower beings mixed in as well. I don't think that the earth at that point was simply occupied by human beings as the one sentient species, which I believe that we are now, at least in the public eye. I think there may be other higher and lower beings which are living away from civilization even today. But at this point in human history, perhaps the higher and lower beings were also around, maybe in the forests.
We will see what Maharishi Valmiki says about that, but you raise an interesting point, which is that we often apply modern templates to try and understand the past.
Yes.
And many times that fails. in the Ramayana. For example, we were just talking about the Janpads. If we apply a modern template that there is a kingdom and then there are other kingdoms and they're going to fight with it, you would come to the wrong conclusion that in this land between the Himalayas and the sea, basically there was no political unity because all of these were small kingdoms. However, if you understand that Dashrath collected tax from all the other lands, not only that, we'll see later, the others had a role to play in who succeeds in Ayodhya.
Oh.
Yes. So there is an incredible amount of political and social oneness, which you will miss if you apply modern templates.
Was the Ikshvaku dynasty a dynasty of emperors?
It was a dynasty of the rulers of Ayodhya.
Okay.
Starting from the founder Ikshvaku. And in fact, Valmiki gives a full list of 34 kings from Ikshvaku up to Dashrath. Just imagine 34 kings. How many dynasties do we know in history where we have a full list over centuries like this?
34 generations.
Generations of Ikshvaku rulers up till Dashrath.
Extends way beyond like 1,000 years also, I think.
Yeah, it depends on how you, what is the average, rule.
Or lifespan of human beings.
Or lifespan,
which
yes.
I'm pretty convinced was much longer at that time. Is anything mentioned about lifespans?
See, there are some exaggerations, clearly. So, if you say that somebody ruled for 60,000 years, you have to interpret that as 60 long years. It is similar to a word usage today where you will see, there were millions of people on the street. Well, there were a lot of people on the street.
For me, growing up as a boy, the battles within the Ramayana and the Mahabharata were the highlights for me. It's almost like the action scenes of the movie.
Yes.
So I'd love to know a little bit more about the battles, sir. Especially again for the Western viewer, what they're visualizing is bows and arrows, swords, maces.
Yes.
But there's also an element of mysticism. Almost like, have you ever seen the anime Dragon Ball Z where they have beams that they shoot out of their hand? Honestly, I do visualize some aspect of beams and light-based bombs that are thrown around in the battles of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Again, I'm not trying to attach realism to this. I'm actually trying to understand it from a visualization perspective. So what is written about the battles?
Right.
And or the question could be, how is a warrior described in the Ramayana?
So, visually think of this as two types of weapon systems. One you hit with a hand directly and one which you throw from a distance, right? So what you hit from a hand is a mace or a sword and those type of things. And then what you hit from a distance, apart from a spear, most of these weapon systems are fired off from the bow, right? So the bow and arrow is a basic ingredient in it. But that arrow was often not just a physical arrow. There were also descriptions of certain, you can think of it as chemical reactions, in that some of these weapon systems which were fired from the bows were hollow from inside with a fire inside. In the last discussion, we had talked about 2 entire chapters of lists of weapon systems, but we don't know how it works, right? And this is where the list comes. So Vishwamitra taught all of this to Ram and Lakshman. Visually, you can think of Tataka right now throwing things at them, rocks and things like that, tree trunks. There is not a description of her using weapons in this, although the Rakshasas also had all the weapon systems. And Ram and Lakshman are firing off their bows and arrows, and their arrows are not only arrows but other astras and shastras, weapon systems as well.
Okay, one more small interjection. Firstly, I want to tell Western viewers that whenever Sir is breaking into the Indian version of speech in this podcast, it's not Hindi, it's Sanskrit, which could be considered the predecessor to Hindi, the predecessor to Hindi. So Sanskrit is our ancient language. The equivalent would be Hebrew for the Jews, or Latin, again from a Western lens. But Sanskrit itself is considered one of the most ancient languages in modern day civilization. And many of our mantras or our chants or our prayers in Hinduism or Sanatana are in Sanskrit. Sanskrit itself is said to contain power. So I would love for us to do one Sanskrit mantra, Gayatri mantra. Okay.
Sure.
Om Bhur Bhuva Swaha
Bhurvuvaswaha
Tatsavitur
tatsaviturvarenyam
Varenyam
bhargo
Bhargo
devasya
Devasya
dhimahi
Dhimahi
dhiyo
Dhyo
yo nah
Yonah
prachodayat.
Prachodayat. Each syllable is said to contain power and is said to have an effect on your own body, mind, and soul. But the thing is, they say that of all the mantras which were ever created, the modern day human has access to very, very few. To the degree where the Gayatri mantra that we just spoke about is one of the most common mantras chanted in modern day India. But I've had Tantra experts come on the show and say that this is the modern version of the Gayatri Mantra and the actual version is lost in time.
And good you brought it up because this was made by Vishwamitra. So we were talking of Vishwamitra and you brought up the Gayatri mantra.
Really? Okay. Just was being
Yes.
instinctive about the conversation, but I'm glad. What is also mentioned about the Astras and Shastras, I believe, is that, and again, I'm referencing the 80s TV shows we've seen a little bit here. So, in both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata battles, when someone is firing an arrow, they'll often take their bow, lock the arrow in, point it to the sky, chant a mantra in their own mind, and then the visualization that was shown was that the arrow suddenly gets transformed into some kind of a bomb or some kind of a beam of light, which is more powerful than a simple arrow. And that's one of the visualizations I have when it comes to understanding the battles and how they went about in the Ramayana and Mahabharata. I do believe that there was an ancient science of mantras which was
Yes.
used in the battles in order to charge the weapons up. One small other interjection: the Mughal Empire, which is very commonly known as the medieval phase of India.
North India.
North
Yes.
India. And a lot of Sanatanis view the Mughal Empire as kind of almost a negative phase of their own history because Hindus were subjected to a lot of suffering. And a lot of the modern day Hindu-Muslim rivalries and even the religious tension that we see is attributed to that phase of history, medieval Indian history. Again, we're not trying to make this a video about anything other than the Ramayana. But the reason I brought up the Mughal Empire is because I wanted to bring up something called the Ahom dynasty, which ruled over Assam, which is an eastern part of India. And I believe they also ruled over the whole northeast of the country. Now, what's said is that the most powerful Mughal emperor was Emperor Aurangzeb, and that was the one part of India he couldn't take over because he was subjected to very fierce battles with the Ahom dynasty. But the Ahom dynasty was also able to use mysticism in their battles with the Mughals. So there are stories about the Ahoms where they say that they would use illusion to psychologically defeat the Mughals first. Where there are also legends like, and this is from medieval India, where they say that some of the mages or the mystics in the Ahom side were so strong that one day they made an entire camp of Mughals disappear overnight. So over the course of one night, apparently all of the Mughals just disappeared from their war camps and they were not to be found, and therefore the Ahoms were declared as the victors.
Oh.
So this is the last reference of Mantra Shakti based battle that I have heard in Indian history. But this is what, like 300 years ago, 400 years ago? You don't even know what was happening 14,000 years ago.
Yes, and you spoke about creating illusions. There is a master of this, Ravan's son. We will come across him later on, Indrajit, who was a master of illusions in battle. So you also mentioned that, about Sanskrit. I just want to clarify for those viewers that the original is written in Sanskrit. So when I'm saying something, I am picking straight away from what Maharishi Valmiki has written.
Right.
So after the incident with Tataka, they headed further east and then they came to the ashram where Maharishi Vishwamitra was doing his yagya. This was Siddhashram. After the Tataka one, this was a beautiful forest on a hill, deer playing around, and beautiful song of birds in the air and so on. An air of sanctity and peace. But it was also an illusion because the Rakshasas could attack any time. He was facing a problem, right? So once they reached there, Vishwamitra started his yajna. Ram and Lakshman stood on guard. And Anidrau Shadaho Ratram, for 6 days and 6 nights, without a break, without sleep, they remained on guard until finally the attack came. So Marich, Subahu, and some other Rakshasas attacked them from all sides. Ram and Lakshman were thoroughly outnumbered. But Vishwamitra had taught them some weapon systems, astras and shastras, just now, on the way. And of course, they were great archers. So they were able to fire off, although they were outnumbered, they were able to fire off these astras very rapidly in all directions. And they managed to kill all the attackers, all except one. So Marich was injured, but he managed to get away. And if you're broadly familiar with the story, he comes back to play a terrible role later on in the story as well. But for now, he manages to get away. And so Vishwamitra was able to complete his yajna. He was very pleased. He blessed Ram and Lakshman. The next morning, the other rishis, the sages of Siddhashram, suggested that Ram and Lakshman could come with them. They were headed to a place called Mithila, the city of Mithila. And if Ram and Lakshman came with them, they could see a famous bow, Shiva's bow, Shiva Dhanush, that King Janak had there. So Vishwamitra, yes?
Again, we have to bring in Shiva again.
Uh-huh.
So the same way that in this story, we consider the divine to be Vishnu and Vishnu descends to the earth as Shri Ram, there is another key deity in Hinduism. That deity's name is Shiva. And Shiva has his own lore and his own texts associated with him. But he's also referenced a lot in the Mahabharata and Ramayana, often as a deity that they pray to as a source of power. They say that Shiva would provide different kinds of astras throughout these two epics. That's all the reference that one needs for Shiva when it comes to the Ramayana.
So Vishwamitra, Ram, Lakshman and the other Munis set off towards north now, towards Mithila. Uttare Jahnavi Tire Himavantam Shilochayam. So to the north of the river Jahnavi, towards the foothills of the Himalayas. Right? So Jahnavi is another name for Ganga.
Okay.
Yeah, river Ganga. Now, as they were going on this journey, Vishwamitra told them all stories of the lands that they passed through. When they crossed the Ganga, he told them the story of Ganga. Now, it's interesting that Ganga has a special place in our culture, right? Vishwamitra told them the story that happened many years even before Ram's time. So this was during an Ikshwaku king called Sagar, an ancestor of Ram. There was a severe drought in the land. The rivers had dried up. Thousands of people died. And the challenge was to bring down water from the Himalayas. It was frozen on top of the Himalayas. Bring down the water from there into the plains. Katham Ganga Avataranam iti chinta paro bhavat. How to bring down the waters of Ganga. That was the challenge. Now, not only did they have to bring down the water, the height difference between the top of the Himalayas to the plains, I'll give you an idea. So Ganga starts at Gangotri, right? The glacier. From there till Haridwar, when the Ganga comes into the plains, the height difference is about 10,000 feet. So 3 kilometers. 3 kilometers of vertical distance over a fairly short distance. So if water comes down such a great height over a short distance, it will destroy everything in its wake. And they recognized it at that time. Gangayah patanam prithvi na sahishyati. The earth will not be able to bear the descent of Ganga. Essentially, they had to bring down the water in an environmentally sustainable way, right? Otherwise, it will destroy everything. For 3 generations, no one was able to do this. Until finally, there was King Bhagirath, again an ancestor of Ram and descendant of Sagar, who set off to the Himalayas to bring down the water. Now, Bhagirath's story is very interesting, how he did that. In fact, I want to show you visually so that you will be able to get a better sense for this. Would you like to watch a short clip on this?
Sure.
Right.
Bhagirath worked extremely hard for many years, or in other words, did tapasya, and was finally able to get the water down safely. Bhagirath brought down the water in smaller streams so that the flow could be better controlled and then connected them. In story format, it is told that the force of Ganga's flow was throttled by Shiva, into whose matted hair the river fell. A scene beautifully depicted by Raja Ravi Verma in his famous painting on Ganga. But making the connections was also a huge challenge, for Ganga was lost in the maze of Shiva's hair and could not find a way out for many years. Eventually, Bhagirath was successful, digging flow paths, making bunds and embankments, or in more poetic words, Bhagirath on his chariot led the way, and Ganga followed. Yato Bhagiratho Raja, Tato Ganga Yashaswini. Wherever King Bhagirath went, Ganga followed. But there was a major problem just as the project seemed completed. Ganga's waters disappeared, perhaps split into streams and percolated into the ground. Mahatma Janhu suggested a realignment of the flow path, and finally the river came down to the plains in the desired way. In story format, the river appeared through Janhu's ears. Bhagirath charted her flow all the way to the sea. And so was completed one of the greatest civil engineering works of all time. And it was done in an environmentally sustainable way. The new river brought health and prosperity to the people. Ganga gave life. And so she is Ganga Ma, the mother. She is Bhagirathi, born through the efforts of Bhagirath. She is also called Jahnavi in memory of Janhu's contribution. By the way, since a new river was born, she must have a birthday, which we celebrate on the Dashami of Jyeshtha. Valmiki says that Ganga's waters started teeming with Matsya Kachchapasangaihi Shimshumaraganaih, shoals of fish, turtles and dolphins. The famous Ganga River dolphin that we can see even today. And Ganga's flow was Kvachidrutataram yati kutilam kvachidayatam vinatam kvachidudbhutam kvachidyati shanai shanaihi. At times rapid, at times slow, at times curving, at times wide, at times suddenly falling down, only to rise up again. Muhururdvapatham gatva papata vasudham punah. Again and again it would rise up, only to come crashing down to the ground. Sounds like a promo for whitewater rafting at Rishikesh. What a fantastic achievement by Bhagirath. To this day, a great effort is also called a Bhagirath Prayas or Gangavatarana. What an inspiring story.
So that was the story of the birth of Ganga as told by Vishwamitra as they crossed the Ganga.
You're an engineer, right?
Yes.
I didn't even know that it's possible from a civil engineering perspective to actually change the course of a river. But when I think about it, you can probably just put a lot of sand or...
Yes, and the northern plains of India, they are very flat. So if you change the course a little bit, it can go in a very different way.
Really?
By the way, we will come across another civil engineering project towards the end of the story.
Okay.
So after crossing over Ganga, they reached the city of Mithila. And there, Vishwamitra told King Janak that Ram and Lakshman would like to see his famous bow, the Shiva Dhanush. Janak said, let me tell you the story behind this bow. He said, this bow has been in my family for many generations. It's a very precious Dhanu Ratnam. Yeah. It's very precious. And Janak also said, I have a daughter, Sita. I found her while clearing some land for a yajna. So Sita means the line drawn with a plow. So Sita was an orphan. He had found the baby while clearing the land.
Really?
Yes.
Because the story we hear when we're growing up is that she came out of the earth.
That's a beautiful way of depicting it, right? He's clearing the land with his plow and he finds the baby. And you could describe it like that. But yeah, she was Ayonija. Ayonija means orphan.
Damn. And that's written?
Yes, yes. And not only Sita also describes this story later on in the story, describes her own background.
What does she say?
She describes the same thing to somebody else. Right now, Janak is describing to Ram and Lakshman. Yeah.
Is there any mention of her biological parents?
No, nobody knows.
Nothing.
No. Because she was found as a child.
Okay.
Yeah. And Janak adopted her and he was extremely fond of her. Loved her more than his own life.
Right. One interjection I'd like to make here is that, again, when you're growing up in our country, going back to the narrative about Vishnu and Shiva, they had consorts, right? Even Ma, the divine feminine, has a consort by the name of Shiva. But speaking just about Vishnu and Shivji, Vishnu's consort is Ma Lakshmi, Shivji's consort is Ma Parvati. And they say that whenever Vishnu Bhagwan takes an avatar, Bhagwan meaning God, whenever the god Vishnu takes an avatar, his consort, Ma Lakshmi, will also take an avatar in order to give him company in earthly realms. Is there anything mentioned about this?
Yes, that reference is coming fairly shortly. So Sita is, she was found as a child, and when she grew up, she became of marriageable age. There were many suitors who sought her hand. And Janak said that she will only marry the greatest of all warriors, the most powerful of them. And in order, the test he kept for finding out who's the greatest the test was to lift the Shiva Dhanush. It was extremely heavy. Many people could not even move it. To lift the Shiva Dhanush, put a string it, and operate it. Okay, so this was the challenge for any suitor for Sita's hand. Many people tried, but all failed. You may have heard of this story also as being played out in a auditorium or a hall, right? But in the Valmiki Ramayana, that's not like that. Many people had already had a hand. When Ram and Lakshman came, Janak told them the backstory, that they have been suitors, but nobody has been successful. And so he asked his people to bring in the Shiva Dhanush. They rolled it in with great effort. It was kept in a box with wheels. It was so heavy they couldn't even lift it. So many people wheeled it in. And then Ram opened the box. He lifted it with ease, leelaya, as though it were mere play. He put a string and then pulled the string so hard all the way up to his ear. And because of the tension, the bow was bending, right? And then it suddenly snapped into two pieces. Janak exclaimed, "What extraordinary display of strength, power, and technique. I wish to give Sita's hand to Ram in marriage." And so messengers were sent to call Dasharatha. Remember, Dasharatha had sent off his sons Ram and Lakshman to fight two Rakshasas. So first of all, he was delighted to hear that they were safe.
I have to stop you here for a
Yes.
bit. I'd love to know what is spoken about the appearance of Shri Ram and Ma Sita. Are they described in terms of how they looked?
Yes, there is a physical description coming later. I can tell you how. So much later in the story, Sita asks Shri Hanuman to describe Ram because he has come as his messenger. She wants to make sure that she's actually seen him. So he says, "Can you describe him for me?" And then he gives a detailed description. And so there is a much detailed description there about Sita, not at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, it comes later. Yeah.
Again, I'm asking this from the perspective of the audience visualizing.
Shri Ram was, of course, very powerful, handsome, regal, but also pleasant. He had one of the things that you hear many times, Ajanubahu, very long-armed. You could not see his shoulder blades. The muscles were so strong, extremely muscular. And yes, so that is the description of Shri Ram. And Sita as well, very, she had all the great qualities of beauty as described. And in fact, there is also a point where, unfortunately, Ravan is talking about Sita's beauty, which is not very pleasant to read because he's looking at her in a very lecherous way. Right? But for now, a prince and a princess, for your audience to picturize, right? A prince and a princess. Yeah.
Also about Lakshman.
Lakshman was very much like Ram. They looked very much like each other. And in that description where Hanuman is describing to Sita, right? He says he looks very much like Ram. The only difference is that Lakshman is fair, whereas Ram is dark. So also Ram is dark-skinned. Yes. You would have seen in many depictions, they show him in a dark blue color, but actually it's, dark skin.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So, Dasharatha is called. He comes to Mithila with a great army, bearing gifts together with his advisors. And there the marriage of Shri Ram and Sita is finalized. Not only that, Lakshman is also married to Sita's sister, Urmila. And Bharat and Shatrughna get married to Sita's cousins, Mandavi and Shrutakirti. So all four brothers get married. And then Vishwamitra from there goes off to his ashram.
What geographical location are we supposed to understand?
Mithila is east of Ayodhya in the foothills of the Himalayas.
Okay.
So Ayodhya, we are in the, northern plains of India. And east of that, south of the Himalayas, just in the foothills.
Fair to say Nepal?
Yes.
Roughly.
Yes.
Because I have a lot of Nepali friends who say that, Sita Ma was from Nepal. I'd probably like to believe that as well. Okay.
After the marriage, everyone returns back to Ayodhya. And we are about at the end of the first book of the Ramayana, Balakand. In the last few verses, Valmiki describes the growing love and affection between Ram and Sita. So once again, I'd like to show you some of the actual verses, how he has described it. So this is the end of the first book, Balakand of the Ramayana. And here it ends. Valmiki describes the growing love and affection between Ram and Sita.
Smells so nice.
Ram was extremely devoted to Sita. Gunad Rupa Gunachapi Pritir Bhuyo Bhivardhate. Sita was beautiful and had all the great qualities, and Ram's love for her grew ever more stronger. Tasyascha Bharta Dvigunam Hridaye Parivartate. For Sita, her husband was doubly dear. Antargatamapi Vyaktamakhyati Hridayam Hrida. They could read each other's minds, what was in their hearts, even when things were left unsaid. Ram and Sita were like Vishnu and Lakshmi. And with those words, the first book of the Ramayana comes to an end. Balakandam Sampurnam.
Wow. Beautiful.
So, many times children's stories end with the prince and the princess getting married. And then they live happily ever after. But our story is just getting started. And in fact, Maharishi Valmiki shifts gears very much at this point in time. So far, we have heard stories over centuries, right? And we've traveled from the Himalayas into distant lands. But now, in the next book of the Ramayana, the Ayodhya Kand, Valmiki zooms in to one place, Ayodhya, and describes events over only a few hours in a blow-by-blow description. So out of all the different books of the Ramayana, if people ask me which is your favorite part, favorite book, extremely difficult to pick, but if I have to pick one, it will be the Ayodhya Kand, I think.
Wow. I would assume it's the battles. For me, it's like the battles. But anyway, go on.
Yes. The Ayodhya Kand begins like this. Time moves on in Ayodhya. Dasharatha starts to feel that it is time, his body needs some rest. Jiranasya sharirasya vishrantim abhirochaye. I feel this body has become old and needs some rest. It's time to retire. And he should hand over the empire. Now, who to hand over to? Clearly, the best person for that is Ram. So, in the first 2 chapters of the Ayodhya Kand, Valmiki describes in great detail why Ram was the most suitable candidate to succeed Dasharatha. He talks about a lot of his qualities. Once again, I want to show you a brief clip and then, we'll go ahead with the story.
Sure.
Why Ram? Ram had already demonstrated through his conduct as a prince that he was the most qualified candidate for this role in every respect. Valmiki says, in archery there is no one who can match him. He is an expert in leading and commanding the troops. Yada vrajati sangramam na vijitya nivartate. Whenever he goes into battle, he never returns without defeating the enemy. He is a great warrior in every way. In fact, the greatest of them all. And though he is overwhelmingly mighty, he is never proud of his strength. On taxation and administration, ayakarmanyupayadnyas sandrashta vyayakarmavit. He knows the right means of generating revenue for the state and the right way of expending the resources. On people skills, in demeanor and speech, he is always pleasant, mridupurvam. He is ever grateful to those who have done a single good deed, but does not carry the grudge of even 100 offenses. He is highly adept at attracting and retaining the right individuals and in controlling or removing those who create problems. He is most persuasive in debates and discussions, taking people along and not demanding subservience. And with regards to what we call extracurricular activities, Vaiharikanam Shilpanam Vidnyata. He is an expert in the instruments used for entertainment and sport, and is proficient in music too. Ram is always righteous, true to his word, and free from envy. He possesses a sound character with forbearance, gentleness, and a sense of gratitude. He has attained control over his senses.
Maryada Purushottam.
So the essence of Shri Ram out of all of this was that everything that he did was driven by Prajapalana, the welfare of the people, the well-being of all. And he knew that this well-being could only be ensured if society was based on Dharma, righteousness, and truth. For many of us, admittedly, self-interest comes first. Then we think of near and dear ones. And sometimes about the broader society, others, and so on, right? So our interests are in our triangular shape with our self-interest on top. For Shri Ram, the priorities were inverted. So everything that he did was concerned Prajapalana, the welfare of everyone. And his own self-interest was simply absent. And remember, this was the ask of Valmiki right in the beginning when I showed you those shlokas. He had asked, Sarva Bhuteshu Kohita, who is concerned about the welfare of all people? And Ram was like this. So clearly he was the most suitable candidate. And Dasharatha considered, him being the Yuvraj. But interestingly, he could not just appoint him Yuvraj. He called for a meeting of a parishad or council to discuss this matter. And it's interesting who all attended this council. So there were other kings, there were citizen representatives of other kings, and also people who resided in the forests and the mountains. Vanashailanta Vasinha. We spoke about the Vanaras last time. Now just think about it. This is a matter of succession in Ayodhya. And who's discussing this? Other kings and citizen representatives. Very interesting political structure. So Dashrath called this parishad and told them, I'd like to propose Ram's name. Please consider it. And if you agree, then give me your approval. If you think there is somebody else who is more suitable, please do tell. Because these discussions by the unbiased reveal the right answer. Now there was care had been taken to ensure that people in this council were neutral, madhyastha, that they should not have a conflict of interest. So of course Ram and none of the brothers attended the council. Also, Bharat's grandfather, the king of Kaikeyi, was not invited. King Janak was not invited because they were not neutral, right? So this council, when Dashrath proposed his name, they went and had their discussions. And they came back and told Dashrath that they wholeheartedly supported Ram's name. Dashrath asked them, pretending as though he did not know, Ajananniva. He said, why are you so keen to see him? Am I not doing a good enough job? He wanted to hear why they had chosen him. And the people gave many reasons. But it's interesting what they emphasized. They said, Ramaha Satpurusho Loke Satya Satya Parayanaha. In this world, Ram is the very embodiment of Satya, truth. And that is why we want him to be the successor. Because they knew that their welfare would be ensured by somebody who protected righteousness and truth. So Dashrath then called Ram to the palace. He told him, you have won over the people with your virtues and your behavior. Tasmat tvam pushya yogena yauvarajyam avapnuhi. Therefore, tomorrow, in the Pushya Nakshatra refers to certain star positions in the sky. In the Pushya Nakshatra, you shall be crowned Yuvraj. Dashrath also said, I have an uneasy feeling. I want to get this done quickly. So, it is the month of Chaitra. The forests are full of flowers in bloom. Let's get this done tomorrow itself. Now, these three clues, Pushya Nakshatra, month of Chaitra, and forests in bloom, these are the kind of clues that are used by researchers like Nilesh Oak that you mentioned earlier. He will use this to date the events of the Ramayana, among other things.
I was about to ask you a tangential question on the astronomy aspect.
Yes.
Because it's something that's coming to the forefront now. While growing up and having conversations about the Ramayana and Mahabharata with other Sanatanis, we never spoke about astronomy. I didn't even know that astronomy is a part of these texts.
Yes.
What other aspects of astronomy are mentioned? Because, again, as we keep talking about with Nilesh Oak sir and Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson internationally, the nature of the earth is such that anything that's buried in the earth will most probably erode after 3,000 years unless it's either made of metal or stone. I think even metal erodes, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
But some stones don't erode, which is why the pyramids have sustained for this long. And unfortunately, the limitations of dirt archaeology are that they are subject to the whims and fancies of nature. So there is no way that the traditional world of archaeology and the traditional world of academic historians will be able to even consider the Ramayana and the Mahabharata as real events that happened. But in my eyes, that's a limitation of that world. And the truth of these events lies in the Valmiki Ramayana and Ved Vyasa's Mahabharata.
Yes.
how much of astronomy is mentioned?
A fair amount. And in fact, maybe, of course, best person is an expert like Nilesh to talk about this. But I have come across a lot of different clues like this. For example, there is another time when Lakshman looks up at the sky and he gives some specific star positions. Oh, that star is in that position, and etc., etc. And then you can work back, and when would that star position have occurred, right? You can measure that. Astronomy is one. The other is also geology, positions of rivers. For example, there is the description of the Saraswati River. Saraswati River is still flowing at the time that Ramayana was written. So we know at a particular point in time, the Saraswati dried up. So therefore, that's a marker that says that the Ramayana happened before that.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay. Moving on.
So Dasharatha told Ram that you will be crowned Yuvraj the next day itself. Ram then went to meet his mother Kausalya. Lakshman, Sita and Sumitra were already there. Ram respectfully touched his mother's feet and he said, Pitra Nyuktosmi Prajapalana Karmani. Father has assigned me the responsibility of taking care of the people. Interesting use of words, right? It's responsibility, not privilege, and taking care of the people, not ruling over them. And to Lakshman, Ram said, my brother, we have to do this together. Kausalya blessed Ram, and then Ram and Sita went back to their palace. Guru Vasishtha went and briefed them about what they had to do in preparations for the ceremonies the next day. And as he was returning, Vasishtha saw that Ayodhya had started preparations for the coronation the next day. The air was thick with excitement. People were out and about. The Rajmarg, the royal boulevard, had been sprinkled with fragrant water. Decorations were being put up, flowers and flags on the buildings. People were happy. But one person was not happy. And that was Kaikeyi's maid, Manthara. So Kaikeyi was the Bharat's mother, Dasharatha's third wife. Her maid stormed into Kaikeyi's chambers. Manthara went there and said, Uttishta mudhe, get up, you fool. Don't you realize danger surrounds you? Maharaj has decided to crown Ram as the Yuvraj. Now you and Bharat will be left with nothing. That's what Manthara said. Kaikeyi was delighted when she heard this. And she told Manthara, Rameva Bharatevaham Vishesham Nopalakshaye. Ram or Bharat. I don't differentiate between the two. Ram is the most suitable and he's also the eldest. I am so happy to hear that Ram will be crowned Yuvraj. Here, I give you this piece of jewelry for bringing me this wonderful news. So that was the starting point, Kaikeyi's frame of mind when Manthara brought the news. And now just watch, Manthara must have written the playbook on how to poison someone's mind. Because she started at it. She created a division where there was none. Kaikeyi had said Ram or Bharat, I don't differentiate. She started speaking of Ram and Dasharatha as one side and Kaikeyi and Bharat as another side, Paksha. So, she was talking about the other. She said that their interests are different from your interest. And like anybody who poisons someone's mind, Manthara also said, look, I only have your best interests at heart. That's why I'm telling you. And she said, can't you see? They're taking you for a ride. And finally, Kaikeyi's mind was poisoned. Or as she saw it, she finally saw the light. And she told Manthara, oh, if you hadn't told me, I would have never realized that they are trying to trick me. Now I must get the kingdom for Bharat. But then she asked Manthara how to go about it. Kena upayena manthare. Manthara reminded Kaikeyi that she had the king wrapped around her little finger. He was infatuated with her. She also reminded Kaikeyi that the king had given her 2 promises. And now was the time to ask against those promises. And Kaikeyi should ask that Bharat should be made Yuvraj, the successor, and Ram be sent off into exile. Kaikeyi liked the idea, and she went into a particular room in the palace, which was called Krodhagar or Krodh Bhavan, the anger room,
This is mentioned.
Yes.
Wow.
So if you want to throw a tantrum, that's where you go. So she went there, took off her jewelry, and threw it all on the ground, disheveled her hair, and then lay on the ground waiting for Dashrath. Dashrath, after finishing the work at the court, he was charged up. He had a successful day at court, and he was looking for an evening of pleasure with his queen. Kama bala sanyukto ratyarthi. So he came in and he was surprised to see Kaikeyi in the Kop Bhavan. And he asked her, "What's wrong? What's wrong, my dear? What can I do for you?" Kaikeyi said, "Promise me that you will do as I ask. Only then I will tell you." Dashrath said, "I promise by the name of Ram, without whom I cannot live for a moment, that I will do whatever you ask of me." Although this promise was not really required, because Kaikeyi then reminded Dashrath, a long time back in a battle, Kaikeyi had saved Dashrath's life. At that time, Dashrath had told her to ask for 2 boons, had given her 2 boons. Kaikeyi had said, "I will ask for them later." And Dashrath had agreed. He had said, "Tatha iti." So Kaikeyi was now saying, against those promises, I want to make the asks now. Like I had, mentioned in the last discussion as well, Dashrath had given her 2 blank checks signed up, right? And now she had filled up the amounts and brought them back. And the ask was that Bharat should be made Yuvraj and Ram be sent off into exile in the forest to live as an ascetic for 14 years. The second part was important because Ram was very popular, as we just saw. So Bharat could then consolidate his position as king during that time. Dashrath was stunned when he heard this. First he thought it was a bad dream. And then he went through different waves of emotions. First, incomprehension. He asked Kaikeyi, "How can you ask for this? You've always loved Ram. You have never differentiated between the two. Now why are you bent on destroying him?" He tried to convince her with facts. He said, "Look, he's the most suitable. And by the way, the Parishad, the council has chosen. Now how can I go back to them?" But Kaikeyi was unmoved. Dashrath became angry. He said, "Nrishamse dushtacharitre kulasyasya vinashini. Oh, you vile and wicked woman, you are bent on destroying this family." But again, Kaikeyi knew he could get angry, but he had given the 2 promises. Finally, Dashrath was a broken man. He begged her. He said, "Have mercy on this old man on the verge of death. Have mercy on Ram." In the end, he touched his head to her feet. Apite charanau murdhna sprishami. Kaikeyi's answer was only this: "Nothing will make me change my mind. You must do as you have promised."
I would love for you to also give some context on Bharat's character at this point. Because again, from a Western lens, no one knows how the 4 brothers were in terms of character other than Shri Ram and Lakshman.
I can do that, but very soon, in a while when Bharat comes back, okay, we'll see that in detail. But Bharat did not want to have anything to do with this. Actually, he did not want to get the kingdom like this. And he becomes extremely angry with his own mother, Kaikeyi, when he later finds out what she has done.
Okay. We'll come back to that original
yes.
point in the timeline.
Yeah.
Please continue, sir.
Dashrath just lay waiting. He was defeated. He was slumped on the ground, and the night went by. When the sun came up, Guru Vasishtha came to call Dashrath. Sumantra, the charioteer, he went inside and he told Dashrath, "Maharaj, the preparations are all done. The dignitaries have arrived. Everyone's waiting for you." Dashrath looked up at him with bloodshot eyes and he said, "Don't torture me with such words. Sumantra was stunned. He looked at Kaikeyi and she said, "The king is so excited about Ram's coronation that he hasn't been able to sleep." Dasharatha just said, "Go and get Ram." So Sumantra went to Ram's palace. And then Valmiki describes Ram's palace. It was like Indra's palace, magnificent, opulent. Or like Mount Kailash, he says. Golden statues, diamonds and gems studded in great archways. There were courtyards with deer and peacocks playing around, and great halls full of people bearing gifts, waiting to congratulate Ram. So Sumantra went past all of this into the inner chambers where Ram and Sita were ready for the coronation in their royal attire. And he told Ram that Dasharatha and Kaikeyi wanted to see him. This was a bit surprising because he was not being called into the coronation hall. And Ram told Sita, "Oh, the two must be discussing something about my coronation. My mother," and he's referring to Kaikeyi, by the way, who's his stepmother, but he never used the word stepmother. He always called her mother. "My mother always has my best interests at heart. And so she must be urging father to get on with things. I'll go and speak to them." Ram came out of his palace. Valmiki says he came out like a lion comes out of a cave, regal and majestic. He got onto his chariot. Lakshman was with him. And people started following Ram. It was an procession, an impromptu procession. People on horseback, foot, even on elephants, musicians, singers, dancers. Everyone followed Ram. They blessed him. And then he reached Dasharatha and Kaikeyi's palace. He went inside, touched their feet, and Dasharatha only said, "Ram," and then he choked. He couldn't say anything more. Ram looked up at Kaikeyi, concerned. Is he ill? Have I done something wrong? Has something happened to Bharat? Kaikeyi said, "It's a simple matter. He has made 2 promises and now he's trying to wriggle out of it. But that is pointless. And I'll tell you what it is." And then Kaikeyi told Ram about her demands. That Bharat should be made Yuvraj and he has to go into exile. Now pause here for a moment. Ram's life has turned upside down in a moment. He was about to be crowned Yuvraj of the greatest empire in the world. And in one moment, he's left with nothing. Because of no fault of his. And he has been stabbed by someone he calls mother. All of us face difficult situations in life. Things don't turn out the way we would have wanted them to. And we started like this, what is the purpose with which Maharshi Valmiki wrote it? So as we also face these situations, the ideal is Ram's reaction. Let's see how he reacts to this life-changing turn of events. He immediately says, "Evamastu, so be it. Gamishyami vanam radnyah pratidnyam anupalayan." I will go into the forest in order to uphold the king's promise. See, for Ram, Prajapalan, welfare of the people was most important. That could only be ensured if Dharma, righteousness, is there in society. And if the king's word cannot be trusted upon, if the king's word is broken, then whose word can be trusted? And so he had to make sure that whatever he did, the king's word is not broken. And even if it meant that for him, it was, in a very unfair way also, he lost everything.
6 years of your life have been dedicated to learning about this epic, studying this epic. My question to you is, if you study a text long enough, you begin to read between the lines a little bit more than the average person who's reading that text for the first time. So the question to you is, what do you actually think Shri Ram felt in this moment?
Between the time that Shri Ram went in, so Valmiki describes how the Ram that went into Dasharatha's palace and then the Ram that came out, there is no difference at all. That is the surprising thing. He was calm, radiant, steadfast, life-changing turn of events, and he's able to look at that straight and say, Eva Mastu, so be it. And you asked me, when you read the text again and again over a few years, what happens? I must say that, for me also, some of these parts in the first reading, I went past them fairly quickly. And it is only later, or maybe it's also because, we are familiar with some of these stories. We know Ram went into exile. He went into the forest. So when this part comes, yes, Kaikeyi told him, and then he went, okay, you go ahead. But maybe for the first time viewer, they will realize the extraordinary nature of this from, what he was about to get. I mean, the degree of loss, whether, for us, these matters are maybe a career loss or a not getting into the college that we want to, etc. Right? Various types of things that don't work out. What can be more extreme than this?
Okay, carrying on.
Ram accepted it immediately, and, we'll see this again and again. He's always thinking ahead. So, his concern was about Dasharatha. He must be feeling so terrible for what had happened to him. He consoled Dasharatha. He also told Kaikeyi that messengers will be sent immediately to call Bharat. Bharat was not in Ayodhya at that time. He was at his uncle's place, at Kaikeyi's father's place. So he said, there shouldn't be political uncertainty. Bharat will be called immediately. And Kaikeyi said, oh, you seem to be quite keen to go into the forest, so just get on with it. And Dasharatha could not bear it anymore. He said, Dik Kashtam. Oh, what terrible torture. And, in this entire conversation, he says only 3 words. Ram in the beginning, Dik Kashtam in the end. Ram comes out of the palace and his chariot is waiting for him. But he declines the use of that chariot. It was no longer his. It was a privilege of a prince, and now he was going to go into exile. We talk about being unattached to worldly things, right? This is a great example. I mean, the life has turned upside down, and he's accepted it. The chariot is no longer his. Ram goes to meet Kausalya, his mother. Lakshman is with him. Nobody else knows right now what has happened, right? Even Lakshman, because he was not there inside the chambers. So Ram tells Kausalya what has happened. And when she hears it, she collapses to the ground. Valmiki says, like the branch of a sal tree, that is hacked. She just falls down to the earth. Her heart aches so much because of what has happened to her son. But then surprisingly, Lakshman says, it's interesting that so far, Lakshman, we don't know much about Lakshman because although he was there with Ram when he went with Vishwamitra, etc., in terms of actual dialogues, right, Lakshman hasn't spoken much in the Valmiki Ramayana so far. Lakshman says very clearly, I do not think that Ram should go off into exile. He does not agree. Our father, Maharaj Dasharatha, has become old and he has frankly lost his mind. So what he is saying need not be followed. It is not Dharma, what he is asking. Because what is Ram's mistake in all of this? Which is correct. Ram had done nothing wrong. Why should he go into the forest? Lakshman says, in fact, we should pack them off, Dasharatha and Kaikeyi, into the forest on exile. He tells Ram, take control of the empire. Atmastham Kuru Shasanam, before the word gets out. And if anybody stands against you, I will kill them. Even if our father stands against us, we can imprison him or kill him. Lakshman is boiling with rage. Ram tries to calm him down and he explains why he must uphold the king's word. As to, the unfair nature of this all on Ram himself, Ram says this is all the result of karma. That life has taken a turn like this for him. Lakshman says, cowards hide behind karma. Those who are unable to do anything say that this is all because of karma. But Ram, you are most capable and brave. Why are you becoming philosophical like this? And many times, we tend to agree with Lakshman. Sometimes we think that if everything happens because of what we've done in the past, then why should we do anything? If everything happens because of karma, what's the point in doing anything? But that is an incorrect understanding of karma. So they have a little discussion on karma here. Essentially, I'll break it down in simple words. Karma means every action has a reaction. So good actions have positive outcomes, positive reactions, and bad actions have negative reactions. You're talking of health and fitness, right? You do the right things and your body will be healthy. You eat well, your body will be healthy. So there are good reactions to it. But some of the outcomes are seen immediately and some later on, and some even in next lives. So we consider that the Atma goes from one life to another, and therefore the impressions or the results of karma carry on as well. So whatever we are facing now is the result of our past actions. But which also means that whatever we do now will affect our future. And therefore, karma is not fatalistic. In fact, it's most action-oriented, because it turns the question, why me, into what can I do about it now? Right? You must act. And so both Ram and Lakshman agreed on the importance of action. It's only what action that they disagreed. Lakshman's view was that Ram should take over the empire. And Ram's view was the action should be that the king's word be held true. Kausalya also did not agree with Ram. She said, you are going away because of something that your father said. I am your mother. And I am telling you, do not go. Your dharma is to stay here and rule. And if you still go, I will give up my life. I will stop eating. And my death will be on you. Ram told them repeatedly and very clearly. He said, it is simply not possible for me to do anything but uphold the king's word, which is, I must uphold the king's word. So finally, Kausalya agrees that Ram must go. Her heart is broken, but she blesses him. And then Ram goes to meet Sita. His head is a bit, Valmiki says, as he went through the outer courtyards, which were full of people, Ram's head was bent. He didn't want to look at anyone, and he went inside. And one look, and Sita started trembling. She knew that something was wrong. Remember, at the end of Balakand, Valmiki had said they could read each other's minds or hearts, even when things were left unsaid. And Sita immediately said, what's wrong? What happened? And Ram's face had lost color. He was sweating. Vivarna vadanam prasvinnam. So the same Ram who had not changed at all in front of Kaikeyi and Dasharatha, now thinking about what this meant for Sita, he was unsure. And he told Sita what had happened, what the demands were. And then he told her that she should stay in Ayodhya and take care of Dasharatha and Kausalya. And also Sumitra and Kaikeyi. He told her that he had nothing against Kaikeyi. Ram also counseled Sita on how to deal with Bharat. Bharat was the younger brother, but now he would be king. So how to deal with him, he counseled her.
What is said?
No, how to deal with him. That's all it is said, that Ram counseled her. And then Sita spoke. Now Sita's reaction is very surprising. She looked at Ram in an affectionately angry way, Pranaya deva sankruddha. In mock anger. And she said, what are these words that you're throwing around? I feel like laughing. These words are not worthy of you, of being spoken by you, nor should I be listening to them. Now remember how Dasharatha had reacted. He had, collapsed in grief. So had Kausalya. Lakshman had become very angry. But Sita's reaction was like Ram's. She knew immediately what is the right thing to do. She was dharmadnya, dharmacharini. She knew dharma and she always followed it. So she never asked Ram whether he should follow the king's word or not. No questions. She also did not question that, why did it happen to him? Why me? After all, her mother-in-law had just destroyed her life. So she said nothing about any of this. But she had one objection to what Ram had said, which is why she had called the words laughable. Her argument was simple. She said that a husband and wife have to share everything. So whatever is asked of you automatically applies to me as well. So I have to go into the forest as well. That is why, where is the question of her staying back in Ayodhya and taking care of Dasharatha or Kausalya or dealing with Bharat? That is why she called it laughable. Because I am also required to come with you into the forest. This was her argument. Now, once again, many times we are familiar with the story of Ram. So we know that Sita went into exile with Ram. So we don't realize the extraordinary nature of what she's saying. Look, she didn't have to go. That was not the ask. But she was completely devoted to Ram. Her thinking was, I am there to support you and to be with you come what may. Even if it means 14 years of hardship, I'm there with you. Right? Extraordinary commitment. On Ram and Sita's conversation as well, let's see a short video on this and then we will go ahead. Yeah.
One question before
Yes.
where does the 14-year mark get mentioned?
No, that is mentioned in Kaikeyi's demands. So she says Ram must go into the forest in exile for 14 years and live as an ascetic. Those are the demands.
Okay.
Yeah.
But was it understood that he would come back and become king again?
So, no. Bharat be made Yuvraj and Ram be sent off into exile. Those are the demands. So, Bharat will then become king.
And her assumption was that Bharat would say, hey, I still want to be king after my elder brother returns.
Yes, that and perhaps her expectation also was that Ram may not return. Look, these were extremely, she was sending him off perhaps to his death. In fact, Ram mentions that to Sita as well. He says, when Sita says that I will come with you, he says, this is an extremely dangerous and, difficult time. You don't know whether you will get food or water. There are dangerous animals in the forest. See, many times we think of this as this is not a picnic or a hike. Today we go on a hike, fairly secure, even when we go into the jungle. But here, there was real danger and there was a good possibility that Ram may not come back.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, let's carry on.
Yes.
So there was a video you wanted
Yes,
to
a short
post?
video on Sita about middle of the episode.
She reminded him that a husband and wife are meant to share everything. It is the husband alone that is always there for a woman, not her father, mother, or son. And a wife alone shares the destiny of her husband. O Ram, the best among men, I am also therefore required to live in the forest. Sita argued that what Kaikeyi asked of Ram automatically applied to her as well. Effectively, Sita was objecting to Ram considering her as being separate from him. And Anushishtasmi matra cha pitra cha vividhashrayam nasmi samprativaktavya vartitavyam yathamaya. I have been taught well enough by my mother and my father about my duties in different life situations, about what I ought and ought not to do. Now there is no need to lecture me about any of this. Sita loved Ram and was totally devoted to him. Sita told him that she was least interested in the comforts of royal life and knew the difficulties of forest life. Further, they were to live as ascetics, and so she would be Niyata, Brahmacharini. She would not be a burden on him during the Vanvas and would try and help in whatever manner she could. All she wanted was to be with him. But Ram urged her to drop the idea. Sita's eyes were beginning to tear up as Ram said, Hitabuddhya khaluvacho mayaitadabhidhiyate. I am saying this for your own good. The forest is full of terrible hardships. Food and water are hard to find. There are deadly snakes, dangerous insects, and wild beasts. It is a thorny path. Valmiki has devoted an entire sarga to explain these difficulties of forest life. But Sita countered, "Whatever the difficulties may be, I will gladly accept them, only to be with you. Yas tvaya sah saswargo nirayo yas tvaya vina." For me, heaven is where we are together, and hell being without you. The tears were flowing in a torrent now. Arguing, urging, and entreating, she finally hugged Ram tightly and cried inconsolably. Patim brishamalingya chukrosha saswaram. Ram was finally convinced. He said, "I did not know how you felt about it, and was therefore reluctant to impose the hardship of Vanvas on you. Oh, my beloved Sita, your decision is correct." Valmiki's narration of this electrifying conversation makes this much crystal clear. Ram and Sita were totally committed to upholding Dharma and totally committed to each other. For Sita and Ram, Siya Ram, their relationship was not merely a hyphenation of their names, but a hyphenation of their destiny. Iti, her, asa. That is how it happened.
What incredible commitment. Heaven is where we are together and hell being without you.
We hosted Amiga Natra on the show repeatedly over on the Hindi podcast, and there's a very famous clip which had gone like insanely viral back when this episode had released. I think she says something like, again, I don't remember the exact Sanskrit words, but I think at some point during the Vanvas, Ramji tells Sita that I don't even want heaven if it's without you.
Yes.
And again, what I was talking about at the start of this episode, that a lot of Sanatani kids, when they hear the Ramayana, this becomes their reference point for romance and life, and oneness and fidelity, staying true to one person. I think so much of this story is actually centered around romance and fidelity, and while commitment to one person.
Yes.
Marriage, family.
And this is also the outcome. In the beginning we were saying, so what is the outcome? What do we get? Why has Maharishi Valmiki written it? When we look at this ideal, our relationships will become better. If we have this kind of commitment to others, surely we will see a better relationship. All kinds of relationships, whether they are with spouse or children or at the workplace or with friends.
So I'm seeing someone very seriously at this point, as I mentioned to you off camera.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
When we were getting to know each other, she didn't tell me this, but like I had seen a photo, a very pretty looking photo of Ram and Sita as her wallpaper. And I just asked her, why do you keep that? So she said that so that in life I end up getting a partner. And I thought that's really cute, But again, we're both in our late 20s. I'm 31 years old. We're approaching that relationship with the intention of very, very steady, serious and intense commitment. And I genuinely believe this. I feel like one needs to ideally choose a partner from their own culture if they themselves are locked into their own culture. We had a Chinese national on the show recently as well, and she spoke about the same rule that they follow in China, that mostly Chinese people will choose Chinese partners. And I told her, yeah, that's true for India as well, because we're culturally so elaborate a country that life just becomes easier if you choose someone from your own culture. This is just my opinion. But I feel that's way more important if you yourself are fully steeped in your own cultural values. Someone who shares your own value system in life ends up being a very, very good partner, because please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, and you set wonderful role models, right? Both of you. If you have the right role models of Shri Ram and Sita.
Yeah. It's why, and I don't just speak for myself here, but a lot of people from my generation and Gen Z, the generation after me, um, I don't understand concepts like polyamory and polygamy, where you have multiple partners and open relationships, which is new to India. It's supposed to be a very common thing in Bollywood. And it's also one of the reasons Bollywood is so criticized and people are moving away from it in our country, because people are very aware of these open secrets. But our culture is based on fidelity and the Ramayan and the relationship between Shiva and Parvati and Ma Sita and Shri Ram. So again, it's how a peaceful, flourishing experience of human life should be in my eyes. And it's also possibly the most heartfelt and memorable aspect of the Ramayana, the romance between Shri Ram and Ma Sita.
Yes, and we will see much more of this later on in Chitrakoot and Panchavati.
Moving on, sir.
So, Shri Ram had to finally relent to what Sita was saying. And about the same time, Lakshman came in and he realized that Ram's mind is made up and that Sita is going too. So Lakshman said, I will come along as well. Ram tried to convince him to not come, but Lakshman reminded him that when he had got the empire, he had said, we have to do this together. So he said, empire or exile, I am there with you. Once again, we know the story of Ramayana, so we know that Shri Ram, Lakshman and Sita had gone into the forest. But pause for a moment on the incredible support that Lakshman is giving. He still doesn't think that Ram should go into exile. By the way, he doesn't agree with him. And many times when we advise somebody and they don't listen to our advice, then we say you're on your own, right? And Ram was required to go as per the ask. Sita had argued that whatever applies to him applies to me as well. Nothing required Lakshman to go. He could have stayed back in Ayodhya. He was a young prince in the prime of his life. He could have had a very good time for 14 years. He was giving all of that up only to be there to support Ram and Sita. What incredible commitment again.
This becomes a reference point for one sense of brotherhood.
Yes. Ram told him to go and seek the blessings and consent of all his near and dear ones. Vraja pruchhasva saumitre sarvadeva suhrujjanam. So go and ask your near and dear ones, get their consent, and then you can come. Ram and Sita then started preparing to leave. And as part of that, I want to mention one interesting incident that Valmiki has mentioned, that Ram first gave away 14 years of advance wages to the people in his palace. He gave away many gifts. And as he was doing that, he cracked a joke with somebody. And then he said, oh, don't mind, I was just joking. But what this shows you is that his frame of mind, he was truly calm. When you can joke about things, and he knew that the atmosphere was very tense, right? People were sad to see him go. So even there, to lighten the mood, he cracked the joke, and but then of course he said, don't get upset. And then finally the time came for departure, and Ram, Lakshman and Sita went to see Dasharatha. Dasharatha was in the court. Some word had gotten out, so the court was full. And Ram went up to Dasharatha and told him that he had come to seek his blessing. He will go now. But he also said that Sita and Lakshman will come along as well. I've tried to convince them, but they would not agree. So please grant them leave. Dasharatha then said in, a packed court, he said, I do not want you to go. Please understand, I am trapped because of my words. Arrest me and become the king today itself. Tvameva adya bhava raja nigrahiyamam. So clearly, sometimes we understand the Ramayana as, Dasharatha asked Ram to leave. He did not. He in fact told him, arrest me. But like he said, he was trapped by the promises that he had made. And this is the first time everybody else had understood what's going on. See, so far the others, the Sumantra and Vasishta, nobody knew what was going on. Sumantra lashed out at Kaikeyi. Mind you, a charioteer speaking in harsh words, Vakya Vajraihi. His words were like thunderbolts. But of course, did not change Kaikeyi's mind. Then Kaikeyi got Chirvastras. Chirvastras are rough, unstitched cloths. So as ascetics in the forest, you have to wear this. You can't wear your royal clothes. These are unstitched cloths. So Kaikeyi got the Chirvastra, gave them to Ram, Lakshman, and then to Sita. Sita looked at it. She was puzzled. And she asked Ram, Katham nu chiram badnanti munayo vanavasinaha. How do they wear this? How do they tie it? Right? An innocent question, but it really brought home for everybody that Sita was totally unprepared for forest life. She didn't know. She had been brought up in the palace in Mithila and now in Ayodhya. She had said that, heaven is wherever you are there and hell without you. But really, for the practical difficulties of forest life, she was unprepared. Guru Vasishtha then spoke up. He said, Sita need not go. In fact, she will stay here and rule in Ram's name while he is away. But Sita won't agree to that. But just at that time, by the way, the people spoke up and they spoke up against Dasharatha. They said, Dhik Tvam Dasharatham. Shame on you, O King Dasharatha. Now, look at this. What a fall for the king. He had just presided over a parishad and now people in his own court were shouting against him. Dasharatha found some courage and he said, Sita will take some clothes, royal clothes and jewelry with her because she was not required to wear the Chirvastras. And you know that this jewelry will play some role later on in the story. Also, Lakshman was going away, but his mother, Sumitra, she had a very different reaction to this whole situation than Kausalya. Remember, Kausalya was heartbroken, right? She was crying. But Sumitra was strong. And she blessed Lakshman. And it's, I'll tell you the verse because again, that will play a role later on in the story. She said, Ramam Dasharatham Viddhi, Mam Viddhi Janakatmajam, Ayodhyam Atavim Viddhi, Gacchatat Yatha Sukham. Treat Ram as your father now. So she's telling Lakshman, treat Ram as your father and Sita as your mother. The forest is now Ayodhya for you. Gachatata yatha sukham. Go forth, my child, be well. So she's wishing him luck. She's very strong. Once again, this will also, just like these the jewelry, this verse will also play a role later on in the story. So finally, the time came to leave. Dasharatha asked Sumantra to leave, to take the chariot and leave Ram, Lakshman and Sita up till the borders of the Janpad. So Sumantra brought the chariot. And as they got up, there was chaos in the crowd. People were trying to hold on to the chariot. They were telling Ram to come back. And as the chariot pulled away, Dasharatha came out of the palace trying to take one last look at Ram. But he stumbled and fell. Kausalya came running after, crying, Ram, Lakshman, Sita. But tears were flowing down her cheeks. She could hardly see. Ram turned back and saw his mother and father in such pain. He told Sumantra to move fast, so that everything gets over fast. Move fast out of the city. But still, there was a big crowd around the chariot and chaos. Valmiki says, a cloud of dust had been kicked up because of this chaos. But Paura Janashrubhi Patitaihi Abhyavahitam Mahirajah Prananasha. Tears so drenched the earth that the dust itself got settled. And with that, Ram, Lakshman and Sita's chariot pulled out of the city of Ayodhya. Iti her asa. That is how it happened.
Don't know how to end this episode.
Actually, they have just stepped out of Ayodhya, but before we end, I want to take the story ahead a few more hours because this is not a this is not a tragedy. I don't want to leave it at the thought of people crying, because this is a story of overcoming the challenges of life. So if we just go ahead, what happened was hundreds of people followed the chariot. They kept telling Ram to come back. He kept telling them to go back. That went on till they stopped for the first night on the banks of Tamsa. And the next morning, before the sun was up, Ram, Lakshman and Sita and Sumantra got up before anybody else was up, and they went away on their own so that there's no fuss. The same thing doesn't repeat the next day. And they went off on their exile.
Should we do one last mention of Bharat and Shatrughna here?
Sure. So in all this, see, Bharat and Shatrughna were away at Kaikeyi. All of this, like I told you, this has happened over a few hours. Bharat and Shatrughna were visiting their maternal uncle, Kaikeyi's brother. And they were still there. They have no idea about any of this. In fact, afterwards, once Ram leaves, messengers are sent to call them. And we will get to know about them when they come back.
All right. Do you think this is an apt end to episode 1, sir?
Yes, we are about a quarter of the way through and about halfway through Ayodhya Kand. So, good time to take a break.
All right. I thank Yashodeep, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank all of you for listening in. We're going to be back with the sequel episode to this episode very soon with YD, who's in the house, taking the Ramayana to modern day audiences globally. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.
That was the episode for today, ladies and gentlemen. Please send in your feedback down below. Do share this episode with anyone who you think would like to learn more about the Ramayana in its original form. TRS in the coming 1 year is all about the international game. We're going global. There's a lot of international audiences that want to learn more about the Indian epics, namely the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So through this series with Yashodeep Deodhar, we have begun that mission. We're trying to record this evergreen story for the modern day internet in its truest, most authentic, most deeply researched form. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Do share it with friends and family. Wish you all a very happy Diwali. And Ranveer and the team and YD will be back on TRS very soon. Thank you.